if we look back for a moment at Sense and Sensibility, there Jane Austen is, I think, sort of working out her own vocabulary, and she's playing with the instability of certain words which will become useful to later fiction. And interesting actually is a key word in Sense and Sensibility. And one bit that I underlined in the novel as I read it again is the masterly description of Marianne, who's the passionate sister to the sensible Eleanor. The description of Marianne as interesting. So she was sensible and clever, but eager in everything. Her sorrows, her joys could have no moderation. She was generous, amiable, interesting. She was everything but prudent. So there, being interesting is in opposition to being prudent. It's an entirely spiritual or intellectual or romantic kind of interest that Marianne generates, because of course she, like all the other Dashwood girls, has no money at all, and so can't offer interest in the way that a spinster with £20,000 could interest a man who was low enough to be motivated by such base material concerns.
And Marianne's mother, elsewhere in the novel, is grateful to Willoughby when he rescues Marianne after a fall, as she would be to anyone, but you get the feeling that she's especially grateful to him because the influence of youth, beauty and elegance gave an interest to the action which came home to her feelings. Don't you love it when something comes home to your feelings?
Yeah, it doesn't these days for me. But basically, Willoughby's hot as Hades. But then we discover he's also potentially rich. And so Willoughby later becomes interesting in a more material sense. Since Marianne is a reader of books, Willoughby seems to her like the most interesting kind of fictional hero. His person and air were equal to what her fancy had ever drawn for the hero of a favourite story. Every circumstance belonging to him was interesting. His name was good. His residence was in their favourite village, and she soon found that of all manly dresses, a shooting jacket was the most becoming. So his name was good, he had a great house and snappy clothes. The man is really seriously interesting.
And we have another example from Love and Friendship.
You're a bit obsessed here, Clare.
I really love it. But this time with a negative form, disinterested. So Augustus and Sophia/Sophia are said to be admirably disinterested because they never think about that grubby thing, money. Translation, they don't pay their bills. They, exalted creatures, scorn to reflect a moment on their pecuniary distresses and would have blushed at the idea of paying their debts. Alas, what was their reward for such disinterested behaviour? The beautiful, 2 L's, Augustus was arrested and we were all undone. So Austen is sort of saying here that sometimes people should, think of their financial interests and stop trying to be interesting in all the other more fun but less remunerative ways that people can be interesting.
Yeah, and just to take us back from this very interesting digression to Emma, the topic, Clare, remember, of this podcast, there's an absolutely perfect fusion of the dispassionately material and the erotically fascinated sense of the word interest. When Mr. Knightley says of Emma, I have a very sincere interest in Emma. Isabella, who's Emma's sister and Mr. Knightley's sister-in-law, Isabella does not seem more my sister, has never excited a greater interest, perhaps hardly so great. There's an anxiety, a curiosity in what one feels for Emma. I wonder what will become of her.
I wonder. But at this point in the novel, we don't know that Mr. Knightley is in love with Emma, and he maybe doesn't know it either, or possibly he isn't quite yet in love with her, but he will be. So interest here.
Giving it all away.
Sorry, everyone. Yeah. Interest here is a big flag that maybe Mr. Knightley's sort of paternal concern for Emma may turn into or mask something more.
But I suppose another factor we ought to bring into our view of Austen's satire in general is reading. That great evil.
Yes, indeed. It would be, I think, hard to exaggerate the importance of the act of reading to Austen's novels.
Yeah.
As we've seen, she starts off by writing these self-conscious parodies of other sentimental fiction.
And throughout all six novels, really, there is a very distinct and of its time sense that if you attempt to apply the conventions of fiction to real life, well, that will screw things up for you.
Yes, I have found. And
It's
the
not
sort of
like that.
the old Madame Bovary problem, but
Yeah.
Austen would not have called it the Madame Bovary problem. She would have come to it via the very long-standing and quite annoying 18th century debate about the evil effects of reading fiction on impressionable young minds, particularly female minds. So
Indeed.
the idea was that if you read novels as a young woman, you would forget yourself and your duties. You know, you'd be carried away by all that heightened language and extreme emotions and all the scenes of seduction. So one Regency churchman said that novels carried a turbid stream of vice over the morals of mankind, polluted girls' hearts, and debased their intellects. So, you know, very rational stuff.
Yeah, it's very sensible. I do myself love a turbid stream of vice. So in Sense and Sensibility, Marianne Dashwood has learnt from books, as well as from her own sentimental nature, I suppose, that emotions are the pathway to happiness. And that's why she finds Willoughby quite so interesting. And that's why she is made quite so miserable by falling in love with Willoughby, because he's a sort of fiction of her own invention.
Yeah. And in Northanger Abbey, likewise, we learn that Catherine Morland has been in training for a heroine since she was 15. She read all such works as heroines must read to supply their memories with those quotations which are so serviceable and so soothing in the vicissitudes of their eventual lives. So it's bits of Pope, actually, at this point, which is a nice joke because it both means that she's in the habit of applying fictional conventions to life and that there's a part of her that sort of satirically suspects that she is the heroine of someone else's novel.
Yeah, and there's another side to the women who reads books issue for Austen, which I suppose we should also mention.
Yes, so one target of the satire in Sense and Sensibility is Lady Middleton, the brain-dead wife of Sir John Middleton.
And he is the relation who invites the Dashwoods to stay when they lose all their money in the cottage on his estate in Devonshire. So they're in poverty under his wing, as it were, yeah.
So shades of Austen's, so generous but also quite exclusive brother.
Yeah.
Live in my cottage.
Yeah.
But Lady Middleton, who Colin has described as an icy vacuum of a woman.
I think that's an accurate description of her. Yeah.
But at one point, Austen sort of imputes or transcribes her thoughts about the Dashwood girls. Though nothing could be more polite than Lady Middleton's behaviour to Eleanor and Marianne, she did not really like them at all. Because they neither flattered herself nor her children, she could not believe them good-natured. And because they were fond of reading, she fancied them satirical, perhaps without exactly knowing what it was to be satirical, but that did not signify. It was censure in common use and easily given.
And that final sentence means what exactly? Claire?
Basically that satirical is a common insult, so common that you didn't need to know what satirical meant in order to call people it. Maybe what she means is sort of, you know, a bit acerbic, a bit sharp, not easy or socially complacent, a bit too clever.
Yeah, read books.
Yeah, read books. So a character in Emma calls Mr. Knightley quite a humorist, which is sort of code for you make me feel uneasy and I'm worried that you're laughing at me.
Yeah, you are quite a humorist, I suppose, Claire, too. But the bit you just read out does suggest two things, doesn't it? I mean, one, that for Austen, being satirical is something that women can do, which is really important. And two, that a lot of people regarded it as a necessary consequence of reading in women. Because they were fond of reading, she fancied them satirical.
Right.